Brant, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me, Martine. Happy to be
Hey,
here with the Founder Institute.
I'm excited for this conversation. I know we talked a little bit yesterday, but I know you're coming out of Southern California. I'm sure the weather's lovely there still right now,
Yeah,
isn't
it's a
it?
little bit overcast, but
A little bit.
we're okay.
Oh, okay, we're living, man. I envy that weather. Texas is unseasonably warm right now for some reason, but who knows? Your forward in the book talked a little bit about the crippling freeze we had back in February. I hope we never see that again, but we need impactful companies to kind of change that so that we can avoid these kind of things as the world continues to change around us. So tell us, let's kick this off. And for those of you in the audience, welcome. If you're just joining us right now, you're in the Founder Showcase. I'm sitting down with Brant Cooper. A little background on Brant. Brant is a New York Times bestselling author of The Lean Entrepreneur and CEO of Moves the Needle. He's been a trusted advisor to startups, large enterprises around the world. Over 2 decades of experience helping change industrial or the mindsets in the digital age. And you've helped people from the founder level all the way up to the C-suite, and with so many different ways to just think about how to run your business, but also how to evolve through insurmountable change and disruption, not just in industries, but at the macro level. So tell us, before we start diving into maybe some of the things you've been working on as of recent, how did you get to this point? Tell us a little bit about that journey that led you into this world of helping other entrepreneurs and change leaders.
Yeah, I think it's you get to be a little bit older, like myself. You look back and you try to find a thread that runs through your life, and it's interesting when you can find that thread. I never thought of myself as an entrepreneur. I never thought of myself as a founder. I never thought of myself as being one that was going to invent something. But I was also, not really looking for a 9-to-5 job where I was told what to do and I was going to simply execute tasks all day long. And that's a thread that's run through my entire life. So, out of college, I had some normal jobs, and I was kind of wondering, is this the future? This is just what I'm going to do for the rest of my life, and that was not very satisfactory. Late 90s, I ended up 97. I ended up joining my first startup in Silicon Valley, and I joined as the IT guy, the only IT guy, and that was the first place where I discovered what really is the startup ethos that we all sort of take for granted now. This what I call this exploration mode, where as an employee you're sort of expected to go and figure out how to solve problems, right? So that it's not this structure where you are simply supposed to do what your boss tells you to do. But in a startup, you have to wear multiple hats and you have to drive impact on the business. That's really what you're measured by, is how do you help the business grow? And so my background really, I worked in that area, in the startups up in the Bay Area through the .com boom and bust, and in a number of different roles, starting in IT, but ending up running, product management and marketing and business development and these different parts of the business. And then I, sort of ventured off on my own. And some of my early endeavors were trying to start my own businesses. They failed miserably. But out of that crash, there were a number of people and a number of frameworks that were emerging about, well, how do we make startups not try to act like big businesses who struggle to bring new value to the world? And so, design thinking and Steve Blank's customer development stuff, and some Eric Ries, lean startup. And so I ended up writing the first book that talked about these things: customer development, lean startup, product market fit. And I self-published that to a group of people that were on this Google group that were talking about how to actually implement the practices. So beyond the theories, beyond the frameworks, how do you really test your assumptions? How do you really understand what your customers need? And that eventually evolved into the Lean Entrepreneur, which was a deep dive on how to do those things, what metrics to be focused on, and how do you move from focusing on one to another, and how do you grow teams around accomplishing what you need to do in order to drive impact, in order to grow the business. So after the Lean Entrepreneur, I took that to large enterprises, and that's, now been a decade about of attempting to teach to large enterprises some of these principles and some of this ethos, this exploration mindset. And so that's actually what led to Disruption Proof, and brings us up to today. I know we'll dive a little bit deeper into some of those principles, but I think what's key for the audience is to understand that startups are born with that exploration ethos, and the challenge is, how do we maintain that?
Fantastic. Thank you, Brant. Thank you. And again, audience, if you have questions for Brant, drop them in the chat. We will get to those towards the end of our conversation. So as you mentioned, it sounded like you were busy over these last couple years with writing, because we have been experiencing some insane levels of disruption throughout all of our lives. Just a year ago, we were still experimenting with this platform, AirMe, and now it's really revolutionized the ability for us, the Founder Institute, to really engage our global audience in a way that we never really thought was possible. So tell me, as you were starting to really scratch the surface on this book for Disruption Proof, kind of what was that impetus that really kind of took you over the edge and said, hey, I need to put this down on paper. There's something that just needs to be told.
Yeah. So the book was actually in works for a couple of years. And originally it was purely, my observations. Here are the 10 things or so that companies, large enterprises, need to do to build this exploration ethos beyond innovation. So innovation is like, I always put scare quotes around the word innovation, because it's just a buzzword and people don't define it, and what it means for their organization. And so it gets instantly lost, especially inside of large enterprises. And so I wanted to move beyond the word and really get to the mindset. And so I was designing the book for a couple of years, and I think it was, found my publisher made me an offer in December of 2019. And so the book changed in March of 2020. And so I didn't set out to write a pandemic book, but it's, next to impossible to have written a book in 2020 without a heavily influence of the pandemic. And it sort of crystallized some of my views around this idea of expanding this exploration mode across the enterprise. So the idea essentially is that we face uncertainty. When you face uncertainty, you actually have to go and learn what works, right? Execution mindset only doesn't work, because you're executing on what worked yesterday, yet in the face of uncertainty, what worked yesterday might not work anymore. And so instead of just executing, you have to go into this learning mode again. And again, startups naturally start in learning mode, but they want to get to execution mode as quickly as possible, because that's what allows them to grow. But so it's easy to think of, if I'm trying to design a new product or service, and I realize, and investors realize, that you're really not going to get a return on that for 5 or 6 years, it's easy to understand that you're out in there in learning mode and you're creating this blueprint that'll allow you to grow the company. But what happens when a pandemic hits and your existing market no longer is there? And so if you're a big company, for instance, and you're relying on your innovation group to figure out, where you're going to go in 5 or 6 years, and suddenly your core business is struggling, consumers are not spending money and they're losing their jobs, small businesses are going out of business, suddenly your market is evaporating. What do you do if you're only in execution mode? You fail. And so what was extraordinary about the pandemic was that companies that I had worked with over the last 10 years showed this remarkable ability to pivot, to change their core business in the face of this disruption to their core business. And so I've got a couple of those case studies in the book, happy to talk about it, but it was just, it's rare that you get to see, academia loves to look at history and create these models of how those companies achieved what they achieved. And then we promote those to businesses today. And yet we don't see that practicing those principles actually leads to the change that we hope occur. And so it's unusual to be actually living in the experience where you can see that companies adopted those things and made them their own. This isn't about Brant Cooper's philosophies. It's about, this exploration mindset. But it's interesting to have these examples where they actually applied it over the last 5 or 6 years. So then when they're faced with a disruption, they were able to turn and literally create new value in their tumultuous times. And I guess the other fundamental thing is, people running around calling this the once in a century pandemic. And I'm here to say this isn't the last disruption that's going to hit us this century. I think things like when I raised things like the energy grid collapse and the ransomware attacks took out a hospital system here in San Diego, shipping, like supply chain issues, right? I mean, these type of things ripple through the economy and ripple through our businesses like never before. And it's really because of the digitization of the world, right? We're all so intermeshed. We're so interconnected. And the speed of information and speed of disinformation, the power, we're all running around with computers in our pockets that are thousands of times more powerful than the computers, that launched the digital age back in the 50s. And so all of these factors mean that there's an increased complexity of the world and so much more uncertainty that affects all parts of our business that we can't allow our businesses as we grow to shift into execution only mode. We have to maintain that startup ethos, that exploration mode. And it becomes a balance. It's not only exploration mode, right? I said earlier that startups want to get into execution mode because that represents growth, but you have to be able to maintain this culture of recognizing when we face uncertainty and recognizing that we don't necessarily have the right answer and that we have to go and learn what the right answer is again before we start executing. And so it's fundamentally this balance that we have to maintain in our businesses that's different than the industrial age. And that's sort of the primary idea. So disruption proof is how do we build that ethos into our business so that we're always prepared at some level to respond to sort of the craziness, the complexity, and the uncertainty that's in the world today.
Wow. Thank you. That's incredible. So yeah, Brent, for everybody just joining us, we're sitting at over 500, going on to 550 attendees just
That's
on
amazing.
air. I don't even know how many people are watching us on across all the socials, but if you are watching us across the socials, hop into AirMeet. You're going to have some fun and meet some really cool people here in the room. So we'll be dropping links. We got an amazing team behind the scenes that's helping with the stream, helping behind the scenes right now, running the show, dropping in the chat. So if you all just joined us, welcome. We're the Founder Showcase. I'm Martin. I'm sitting down with Brant Cooper, author of Disruption Proof, Empower People, Create Value, Drive Change. Books on shelves right now. I think we do have a special link, brantcooper.com/FI. We'll be dropping that in the link too. Grab your copy today. Go to a local bookstore. Support local, just like everybody would appreciate, especially in these times right now. So tell me, with Disruption Proof, I mean, it seems like, and you for all of us over the past year, especially through 2020, we were just kind of holed up in our little studio offices. I've just been living in this 16x9 box for 2 years at this point, haven't left. And so what was some of the research and some of the people you talked to that really opened up your eyes as you were writing this book, especially as you changed from the initial topic into obviously what we're facing today? Any interesting insights or learnings that might be worth sharing to our amazing audience right now?
Well, I think that I think that what's interesting is that corporate America wants to be like big tech. They want to grab that startup ethos, but they sort of don't know how to. And so it's interesting to talk to a number of companies. ING comes to mind. That their research was essentially when they were looking at how are they going to reorganize, restructure their business for the digital age, they went and looked at Amazon and they looked at Zappos and they looked at Spotify and they looked at a number of these other tech companies that have essentially built that exploration, built that agility into their business. And so ING ends up being really an interesting example because they structured their business differently. So they got rid of organizing around functions and instead organize around missions. And so if you can imagine organizing around functions, in my opinion, is a legacy of the industrial age. And so say, Martin, if you were producing a microwave oven back in the 50s, you didn't really care about the number of models that you had, or the color, or even the features. You had to worry about the technology. Do we have the technology to produce this microwave oven? And can we produce it in a way that is operationally efficient, such that the cost of the microwave was affordable by the middle class? And if you were able to do that, then there was not market risk. The middle class was raising their standard of living, and microwave was sort of life-changing. And so you could be assured that if you priced it right, they would buy, the middle class. And so the way you organized your business there was around this operational efficiency. And so you had your assembly line, and where the product moves and the workers stand still and they do their specialization, whatever their cell is on their assembly line. And then the rest of the business, operations and marketing and sales and supply chain, all of those became other functions that were essentially along the assembly line continuum. And so you organized your business around this idea of the assembly line. And so then the natural management of that becomes very hierarchical, because I'm going to manage people. I'm going to make sure that they're doing whatever their cell function is as efficiently as they can. And so whole businesses were modeled around this efficiency of getting the product out. But if you fast forward today, and we're thinking mostly of digital products, SaaS, mobile applications, other technology, it really isn't around invention. It's not really around operational efficiency, because now the risk is really the market risk. We sort of know that we can produce these products. We don't necessarily know the time or the cost, but technical risk isn't really where the risk is. The risk is really around, is there a market for this? Can we produce this in such a way that people will achieve value from it, such that they want to buy it? And so if we started from scratch today, would we actually structure our businesses around the assembly line, or around overcoming this marketing risk? And so this idea of structuring the company around missions instead of around functions starts to achieve that. And so ING completely restructured. A bank, this is like mind-blowing to me, a bank completely restructures their business around missions rather than around the functions. And so I think that you see that in tech companies to a certain degree, and you really see that larger businesses are trying to figure out how to do that, and they kind of don't know how, right? And so this, again, I imploring startups to think about that, because when you're small, it's easier to start there than to grow yourself big based upon structuring around function and then trying to change. That's a tough nut. And of course, it's on the investors and the advisors then to actually encourage the founders to think differently about how they're going to structure their companies in order to maintain that mission focus and that exploration. And to be clear, by mission focus, I don't mean that they have to be philanthropic or they have to cure social ills. That's great if they want to, but that's not really why most businesses are in business. By mission focus, I mean that you are in business to produce certain products and services that create value for your customers. And that value for customers needs to be the guiding light, not an arbitrary efficiency metric.
Very interesting. I like that mission over function really resonated with me right there. And I agree. Yeah, it's very legacy industries struggle with that because they're in these different methodologies that just aren't relevant now for this day and age. Might change gears a little bit. Let's dive more into disruption proof in terms of the content and kind of what you're outlining on this. And we actually have a question from the audience that lines right up with kind of what I was about to ask. Marco asked about top 3 core principles startups should focus their energy and time on. You actually have the book broken down into 3 kind of pillars of things to focus on. Would you mind elaborating a little bit on how you approach these 3 pillars?
Well, so there's we're using a SoCal acronym here, RAD, and it's in order to create resilient organizations. So ones that are strong, obviously, but also flexible, and then building in awareness into the company. And by awareness, I really mean that you're you're looking outside the company, you're looking outside even your market, you're paying attention to trends, to demographic changes, to how needs are being addressed, technology changes. You're looking at macroeconomic around the globe, not just even centered on your own country, but obviously if you have supply chains, then you have to be paying attention to that. But it's building in the awareness. So rather than just sort of assuming that I'm reading the Wall Street Journal or something like that, you actually have people and functions that are keeping their ears and eyes wide open to what's going on externally. But also it means increasing awareness inside of the company. How are your employees doing? This is especially important during, like in a pandemic or when everybody's working remotely. It's not sufficient to check in to make sure everybody's sitting on Zoom all day long. You actually have to understand what are the dynamics that are going on in your employees' lives, and how are they feeling, and are they scared, are they fired up, are they engaged, what's going on there. And by the way, because you're paying attention to that stuff doesn't mean necessarily that you're taking action on it. It means that it's informing your actions. And so then the D is being dynamic. And so that's building into the processes this ability to change based upon that new information. And so there are a lot of things that are, it kind of gets right down into the 5 elements. So these 5 behaviors that I think we build into the company in order, and this is all across the company. This is all employees from the front lines to the C-suite. So the first E is empathy. So that's really sort of this awareness, right? But it's building this idea of understanding our customers deeply. It does not mean doing what they say. It means understanding why they say what they say. And it's understanding our employees, and it's employees understanding leadership. Where are they coming from? What do they focus on? What keeps them up at night? Then there's exploration. And so that's admitting when we don't know. So that causes a little bit of vulnerability. We need to build some vulnerability, that we're allowed to fail small in order that we don't fail big. And admitting when we don't know, and then being able to go and learn what it is that we need to learn so that we do know. Evidence, so taking data and insights to help us inform our decision making, cutting through our biases. So we're not making decisions based upon whoever wins the argument, but rather how can we look at running experiments and looking at data that will actually help us inform what the right way is to proceed. Equilibrium is the 4th E. And so that's this idea of figuring out what the balance is in different parts of the company, or even on different teams, the idea of balancing exploration with execution work. And so if, for example, of this, hopefully you've got agile working inside of your enterprise. When I talk about agile, I'm talking about the agile principles. So go to agilemanifesto.org. It's not based upon specific implementations of agile like Scrum or Kanban or SAFe or whatever. Those are fine as they are, but it's really the principles that we want to adhere to, and that really all functions in the business should adhere to those principles. It's not just software development anymore. And so the agile principles are really how you can build in exploration mode. So if you're designing what a team is going to work on for the next week or 2 weeks or month, you build in exploration activities, and that starts creating this balance. And we can understand and see that exploration mode actually makes our execution more efficient, because we're not guessing, or we're not applying things that don't work anymore. And then the final E is is ethics. And that's building our values into our work. So it's not enough to have values, plastered on the About Us What page. It's really around how do we build that into our daily work, and remember that our focus is on creating value for our customers, and it's really around our mission. And so I think it's difficult to do, but again, I believe that if one adapts this agile mindset, then you can build the ethical behavior into the mission statements for a particular team. And I believe that the social structure of the team itself will reinforce the company values. And so that's actually what you see at companies like Zappos, and in my opinion, and it ends up creating the social structure rather than managers having to try to enforce it, because then it doesn't really come from the heart. It gets back to this: I'm doing what I'm told, as opposed to exercising even my own personal values. And so the social structure of a team is a great way to implement that. So I'll pause there as I've gone through the RAD and the 5 E's.
You're getting me going, Brant. You're getting me going again. I think and also for many of you, if you are just joining us, we're sitting at the half hour, a little over. My name is Martin Martinez with Founder Institute, talking with Brant Cooper, author of Disruption Proof, now on shelves right now. We'll drop another link in the chat for y'all to get it. We are blowing up the chat, Brant. Everyone is having so much fun. We got people in Nigeria. We got people in London. We got people all over the world. Welcome.
Nice.
I'll turn up the text and howdy for those of y'all in Texas. So we're going to take a couple more questions from the audience. And then, of course, I know you're a busy man, got more to do. And we got some founders that really much align with some of these. Again, it resonates so much. As you were talking, I hear some of these pitches already. I've been working with these founders for weeks now, getting them ready for the showcase stage. And a lot of this is already lining up. So let's take another one. So Stefan, a simple but yet direct question. And I'm going to build on it a little bit more. What's the number one mistake that startups, and I guess in this case, too, enterprises have been making, especially just over the past 2 years, outside of, if they're lacking any applications from what you're already showing in the book?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think two things come to mind. So first one is, it's really almost always around this awareness idea, right? So empathy is almost a buzzword now. Lexus has it in their car commercials. So that's always a sign of, where we are with a particular buzzword. And I think for a lot of corporations, and maybe for startup founders too, this idea of customer development or empathy for your customers, or being customer centric is another good phrase, means sitting around a boardroom or sitting around a conference room table and imagining you are the customer. Well, what would I do if I was a customer, as opposed to talking to them or observing them? And so I think that we still, it's kind of crazy to me that with the lean startup and design thinking and all of these things out there, that most founders still focus first on product, on building product. And I really think that we end up overbuilding products, and we keep on adding stuff, hoping that we're going to discover our market by adding stuff to the product, as opposed to understanding our customers more deeply, as opposed to really trying to understand them. And that doesn't mean going and asking your customers what features they want. I mean, that's how I did product management 25 years ago. So it's really more about, why are they saying what they're saying, and what are their decision-making processes, and what's driving their need. And so it's getting at this whole different layer of understanding. And so you don't ask your customers to predict their future. You don't ask them things. What will they do? What will you buy? What will you pay for? They don't know. Customers are horrible at predicting their own future. And so it's not easy. Believe me, it's not easy. But so, what I like about the design thinking is that there's a number of tools that, card sorting and these other activities that you can do with your customers that sort of try to get their, doesn't get them to predict their own future, but sort of tries to uncover what their actual needs and aspirations are. And so that's what we are really trying to get to. It's up to you to solve the problem, but you really can't solve the problem or address the need until you really understand the need or the problem. And so you start off with a lot of assumptions, and what you really need to get to is what really moves the customer. Anything that we're doing with products and services is trying to change people's behavior, right? They're doing something now, or maybe they're not doing anything, and you're trying to get them to do something different. And changing people's behavior is really tough. And so you can't just tell them to behave. You can't just implore them to change their behavior. You have to move them. And sometimes moving them means working with them. And so, we often try to get companies to scale before they figure that out. Right. And so, again, this is sort of on investors. If your companies haven't figured this stuff out yet, then you can't worry about whether a particular activity is scalable or not. Scaling comes from figuring it out and then figuring how to scale what you figured out. And so it's there's a lot of analog that needs to happen before we worry about digitization. And so I think that's still the number one mistake in startups. The second thing that I was going to say, though, was the same thing applies to your employees. And so I think, like, especially in the enterprise, you know, these HR or executives come up with their remote versus work policies and hybrid approaches and all of this stuff. And they do it without even trying to understand what it is their customers are facing. So all of the mucky mucks inside of the companies with their home offices, you know, all sheltered from the rest of the family, are all like, yeah, this is great. And they don't understand what the needs are of their employees who are sharing the kitchen table with their partner, who also has to be on a Zoom call, and you know, the pets and all. So it just, again, it doesn't mean that you actually solve particular problems, but it certainly, it informs how you're going to make policies. And so I'm really astounded by the larger enterprises not taking the time to try to understand and develop empathy for their own employees faced with, you know, the issues of the pandemic. And again, this is just not the last disruption that's going to ripple through us in this century. Matter of fact, we'll probably, you know, have other pandemics this century. So it's I just think we need to start building this into the companies that we build, as opposed to, you know, waiting for the, like, so I was an old IT guy, and I never implemented a disaster recovery program until after the disaster. But, you know, if you don't survive a second disaster if you haven't implemented that plan.
Interesting. I love it. Brant. Thank you. We're running a little bit short on time. We're running a little bit over, but I'm enjoying this conversation. So I'm going to take in one more question, and then we're going to kind of wrap up here. I'm actually combining a couple because they do line up very closely together. Anthony and Reem both asking basically the same thing, which kind of lies in with that second point you just made. But really from the employee standpoint. So how can you implement some best practices, whether you're a startup or an enterprise level company, for your employees, and actually have them adopt it genuinely? How can you get them to embrace these values, these ethical standards, without conflicting with maybe their own particular values?
Yeah, I think it's a tough question, and I think it's really the big it's sort of the big hurdle that people need to overcome. So number one is implement agile for everybody inside the company. And again, you don't have to make it as rigid as a lot of engineering or R&D groups implement. But the idea of planning your work for the next week or 2 weeks or months, the sprint length doesn't matter. You're assigning this team a mission statement. And so that team's job is to self-organize, to actually figure out what work they need to do in order to accomplish the mission. They have to supply you as a manager or as a founder with the right metrics. So you're working with them to define the mission. You're working with them to establish the guardrails of behavior and expectations and those type of things. And you're giving them the metrics that they need to report on that measure the progress towards the accomplishment of the mission. So that's not task level metrics. It's not, you know, we tend to measure tasks over time. We want to get to progress towards achieving. What are the signs that we're making progress towards achieving that mission? And so the biggest hurdle is establishing the trust between those teams and the manager. And so you have to start small and start simple. Start with a challenge or a mission that you think your team is able to accomplish. But the key is to give them the authority and the resources they need to accomplish the mission. You have to give them permission to exercise their creativity and their intelligence and their ability to solve the mission. And so do it at the level that you can trust at first, and you start building that into the organization, into the culture. And so even if you have employees that aren't naturally on teams, figure out how to get them on a team, and so that they have these other resources, or as a group, they can accomplish this mission. And again, I believe it's the social structure of a team that's going to enforce ethics, that it's going to hold each other accountable for their work performance, and that are going to adhere to the guardrails and to achieving that mission. And what that does is that frees up the managers or the founders so that they don't have to be managing individuals all the time. It frees up time so that they can be more strategic, can be more proactive, can be more focused on what's needed to grow the company. And so I talk about this in the book as being the team as the new unit of work. And so if you're able to manage a team of, what Jeff Bezos would call the 2 pizza team, right? So, 8 people or so, if you're managing the team and the team is able to self-organize and regulate itself, then that's going to free up all sorts of time and ability for you as the founder or you as a manager to go focus on improving it and driving impact for the business.
Fantastic. Thank you, Brant. We're just about out of time, but I want to give the floor for you for just one little last bit before we head over into our next thing. Any final thoughts that you want to share with this amazing audience? We've been hovering right over 535 attendees the whole time.
Well, as you can tell, I talk a lot. So I'll just sum it up like this. I'll just sum it up like, connect with me. I respond to all messages, emails, or whatever. Happy to help out. I love helping founders. So I'm Brant at BrantCooper.com, Brant Cooper on all social media. And, reach out, especially if you're here in San Diego. Yeah, that's it, Martin. Thanks so much for having me. And I love the crew. And by the way, I'm hoping to get back to international travel too. So if things open up again beyond this next variant, figure out how to bring me to your country. And I'm happy I'm all about the startup ecosystems and helping the ecosystems. I've worked hard here in the San Diego ecosystem. And so I have a lot of ideas about that. So, yep, reach out and, good luck to you all in your pitches and demos. And more power to you.
Awesome. Thank you again, Brant. And again, thank you one more time to the audience for bringing in these amazing questions and already being an amazing, amazing crowd. Probably the biggest one we've had on Air Meet over the past year. One more time, disruption proof, Brant Cooper, disruption proof, empower people, create value and drive change. On shelves now. We have some links in the chat so you can pick up your copy today. Definitely shop local and pick it up at your nearest bookstore. Brant Cooper, thanks again for joining us. It was such a joy speaking with you today. I hope you have a great rest of your week.
Yeah, thanks so much, Martin. Great talking to you.
Likewise. Cheers, my friend.